And I want to cross to Brisbane now and catch up with a Greens councillor for the Brisbane City Council. His name is Jonathan Shree. He's been quite prominent of late supporting Extinction Rebellion protesters. Now, these Extinction Rebellion protesters, Jonathan, have actually caused all sorts of trouble in Brisbane over the recent weeks, blocking traffic and super gluing themselves to the road. But you've been supporting them with some of your resources.
Yeah, so I've allowed them to use my community meeting room, which we make available to a whole bunch of different community groups. And I generally think their demands are quite reasonable. I think the concerns they're raising about climate change and the need to engage in a just transition away from dependence on fossil fuels are perfectly legitimate. And unfortunately, our political system has been completely hijacked by big business and multinational corporations. So these young people don't have any alternative means to have their voices heard.
So who pays for your office facility and whatever facilities they're using?
So it's basically just an empty meeting room. So if community groups weren't using it, it would be sitting empty at night.
So it's funded by the council, though?
To the ratepayer budget, but
it's funded by ratepayers.
The office is funded by the council.
So you're allowing these people to use ratepayer-funded facilities to go out there and disrupt the day-to-day business of ratepayers, to block traffic while ratepayers are trying to get to work, to create chaos in the city of Brisbane.
I think you're stretching it a little bit. I'm allowing them to use my meeting room and to meet there. I do the same thing for a whole bunch of community groups. And that's part of the point of a local council, is to support local community groups.
You know what they're organising are protests that disrupt the day-to-day business of ratepayers. So you know that they're working against the interests of ratepayers, and yet you're allowing them to do that using ratepayers' facilities.
Yeah, and I mean, their tactics are obviously really controversial, but a lot of the ratepayers in my electorate are genuinely really concerned about climate change. It's one of the big issues that I hear from the people I represent. They're like, Jono, the state government, the federal government are not doing enough.
But these people disregard climate change. It's got nothing to do with what they're doing. They are breaking the law, and they are campaigning against a mine development that has been legally approved. So what's climate change got to do with that?
What if it's got nothing to do with climate change? It's got a lot to do with climate change. They're not just protesting against one mine. They're protesting against the lack of government action at all levels and saying we need a massive transition away from our current system.
So why aren't they shining
just transitions?
No, well, they know that this mine has been approved. They know that the federal government, and in fact all levels of government in this country, are taking policy decisions directed at climate change and reducing emissions. They are choosing to disregard all that, stick themselves to the road, disrupt the day-to-day life of Brisbane people going about their business, and they've been arrested and charged by police for doing this, yet you support them with ratepayer facilities.
Yeah, I think where I disagree with you is that implication that all levels of government are doing enough at the moment. They are doing nowhere near enough. They are setting up regional coal towns for failure when even the market is moving against coal.
This is just political tripe, to be frank. This is just, you know, you can put that in your flyers any time you like. But we know that Australia has signed up to Paris. We know that Australia has a renewable energy target. We know that Australia is doing all this sort of costly action, and you won't be able to tell me a country that's doing more in terms of economic harm to itself to meet its Paris targets. The point here is about you supporting a group who are deliberately flouting the law to make life inconvenient for Brisbane ratepayers.
Look, the World Health Organization is telling us that an estimated 250,000 people a year are going to die as a result of catastrophic
Jonathan, knock yourself out. You can sprout that sort of stuff day in and day out, and if you think you can solve the problem of climate change from an office in Brisbane, great. Tell everyone about it. But what I'm asking about here is how you can use taxpayers, ratepayers' facilities to support people who are going out deliberately, knowingly, willingly to break the law and make life inconvenient for those very same ratepayers.
Well, I mean, it's basically because we've tried everything else. We've tried our petitions, we've tried our submissions, we've tried writing to MPs, but they don't listen because they take donations from these companies.
No,
the Labor and Liberal Party don't care about ordinary people. They take corporate donations from coal billionaires.
So you're saying you don't care about the rule of law anymore?
Of course I care about the rule of law, but these multinational corporations clearly don't care about the rule of law. They are using every trick in the book to manipulate our political system.
If you care about the rule of law, how can you continue to host a protest group who deliberately and almost daily flout the law and make life inconvenient for the very ratepayers that you're paid to represent?
I think civil disobedience is a part of a healthy democracy. I think it's great that they're causing disruption to draw an attention to an important issue. That's how so many big movements for social change have started. Even if we talk about things like the same-sex marriage movement. Remember, the queer rights movement started with people blocking roads and getting arrested and engaging in civil disobedience. And the same is true for anti-racism campaigns. You look at what Martin Luther King did. He was using very similar tactics where he was blocking roads, people were calling him a pest, people were saying he was disrespecting the rule of law, but he was right. And now we look back on that and say, oh, he was a hero. But at the time, people criticised him for breaking the law.
So a bunch of people supergluing them to the road to stop, to draw attention to climate change are now likened to Martin Luther King fighting for the rights of black people in America. I mean, this is just absurd.
I'm saying it's a very similar tactic, and I think climate change is a serious enough issue that it merits that kind of civil disobedience.
Yeah, OK. And you've likened these protesters to Anzac Day marches?
No, that's not quite correct. I think that was a bit of a Courier Mail beat-up where I had a go at the editors because they were calling the protesters pests and ferals, and I said, well, look, I think the Courier Mail's inciting people to be a bit, you know, it was a bit of a blow-up. And so then the Courier Mail comes back and says, oh, Councillor 3's against the diggers, which was basically just the Courier Mail trying to have a go at me. I think I made a comment along the lines of, look, there are plenty of things that block roads, and I gave Anzac Day parades as one example. But I'm definitely not saying
Anzac Day parades Anzac Day parades get authority, they get permission, it's organised. Now, if you want to have a parade for the climate in Brisbane, you can get the authority to do that, and you can see how many people you rustle up. And then the reason they're sticking themselves to the road and breaking the law instead is obviously because you can't get the numbers out there for a decent legal protest.
Well, I don't know if that's true, because we've had thousands of people marching in the streets of Brisbane. We've done that. We have had so many big marches. Thousands of people have taken to the streets to raise their concerns with the lack of government action and with the corruption of our political system. But the government doesn't listen because they've been bought out by these companies. But there's a revolving door between the political establishment and the corporate sector. You can't even tell where government ends and big business begins.
Jonathan, you are elected to the Brisbane City Council. That's democracy at work. You mention your friends have protested in the street. That's democracy at work. You've just had a federal election where Adani was a big issue. This all is working. You're making your point and people make their decisions. When will you accept democracy and the rule of law rather than just spitting the dummy and breaking the law and creating chaos for people?
Well, residents in my electorate are telling me that they are really concerned about climate change and they need more government action.
Good on them. But they want to get to work.
I think saying that the federal... to say that the federal election result was a referendum on Adani is completely misleading. I think what happened actually in Queensland was that the Greens vote rose slightly, the hard-right minor parties vote rose slightly, and the major party votes dropped. And really, I think people turned against Labor because Bill Shorten's not a particularly inspiring leader. It wasn't a referendum on climate change or a referendum on Adani, even if some people might say it was. But this is not just about one coal mine. This is about the need for a just transition where we actually take care of those workers in regional towns.
Please, believe me, we hear enough of all that sort of hype. But the point here is the rule of law.
I have to correct you on that, because this is not hype. This is a serious issue.
Just hang on a second and answer this question for me, please,
Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Yeah, the earpiece is a bit delayed. Sorry. Yeah, it's just the earpiece.
What would the Extinction Rebellion protesters have to do before you decided that you would no longer give them the support of ratepayers' facilities?
If they were engaging in any kind of violence, I would be dead against it. But they are so peaceful, they are so polite. They're not attacking anyone, they're not causing any physical harm. They're literally just stepping onto the road for a few minutes. Like, I've seen construction projects cause way more traffic disruption than that sort of thing. So I think this is peaceful, non-violent protest. This is what we mean when we talk about democracy in action. Democracy is not just voting once every 3 or 4 years at the ballot box and then crossing your fingers that the politicians will listen to you. That doesn't work. Of course, people have got to be actively involved on an ongoing basis, and of course they've got to be making their voices heard.
Yeah, they're heard. They're heard, all right.
Democracy.
No one's complaining about them getting their voices heard. The problem is they're breaking the law, they're disrupting traffic, they're stopping people getting to work, getting to doctors' appointments, getting to see loved ones in hospitals. We've had all these examples brought to us. You think your politics is above other people's convenience and right to go about their daily business.
No, it's about drawing attention to the fact that everyone's lives are going to be catastrophically disrupted if we don't take meaningful action on climate change, if we don't stop exporting Australian coal and selling it off for a pittance to companies and countries overseas.
There you go.
We have to transition.
Yep, we do indeed have to transition back to the rule of law, I might have thought. Might be a good starting point for protest. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.